Remember, the detector circuit tells the gate to open based on the amplitude of the signal that crosses the threshold. In this case, the nearby snare drum is generating enough amplitude to cross the threshold. We want that gate to open only when the tom is being played. We're going to tell the detector circuit in the gate to only respond to certain frequencies that are generated by the tom and not inherent to the snare. We now set up a bandpass that centers on a frequency that the tom reproduces, but the snare does not. We also want to have our detector circuit look for peak levels and not average, thus allowing the transients to open the gate. If we wait for averaging, then the gate will open too late, as it takes time for the detector circuit to calculate averages. We then choose 70 Hz as our center frequency. Now when we play our tom track, only a source with 70 Hz content will tell the gate to open. Since the snare drum cannot reproduce 70 Hz content, its signal will be unable to open the gate. If you're not sure what the fundamental frequency of the source channel is, insert an analyzer plugin on the track and find the resonating frequency. The resonating frequency will be the one that has the highest level and sustains the longest. You can double check by clicking on the speaker icon in the plugin and listening to the filtered key source and confirm it is resonating. Also, you should hear the snare far in the background, which also confirms that it is most likely will not have enough energy to open the gate. The gate will now open only when the tom track's low frequencies are heard and ignore all other frequencies. In a similar fashion, we can tell the gate to open by using an external source, such as another channel. Using this technique, we can get creative in our mix, triggering oscillators or reverbs to open when a snare hit, for example. At the top left of the plugin, next to the key emblem, there is a drop-down box that currently reads No Key Input. If we click on the drop-down box, we can choose a bus to be the key source. Simply send that channel down a bus and it will reach the gate as a key source, telling the detector circuit when to let signal pass. We will revisit external source triggers when we discuss time-based effects. For now, we will focus on the use of dynamics for the first stage of balance and blend. Expander settings on a gate are a great way to reduce or eliminate unwanted noise on a track and increase the overall dynamic range of the track. By setting the ratio on a gate to a lower ratio, let's say less than 12 to 1, we are attenuating the signal that drops below the threshold. So if you have a track that was recorded with a lot of noise, you can now reduce the level of the quiet parts. Be careful not to attenuate quiet parts that you want to keep. Also, be aware that the decay of the expander can make a track sound unnatural or draw attention to it. Experiment with various settings, remembering always to check it in the mix to make sure the balance and blend are still intact. Without a doubt, the most used and possibly most misunderstood tool in the dynamic arsenal is the compressor. Compressors allow us to decrease the volume of the louder parts of a signal, mostly as transients and peak levels. With these transients under control, we can actually increase the overall volume of the signal. These changes will also control the envelope, or attack, decay, sustain, and release of the audio signal, giving the audio signal more fullness and sustain. In some way, the compressor is the opposite of a gate. A gate attenuates signals that go below the set threshold. A compressor attenuates signals that go above a given threshold. Before we apply compression to our tracks, let's review the parameters of a typical compressor and see how it affects our audio. Threshold is the level at which the gain reduction begins, usually represented in level decibels. Any part of the audio signal that reaches that level triggers the compressor to start to attenuate that signal. Ratio is the amount of gain reduction applied once the signal exceeds the set threshold, represented in a ratio. For example, a compressor set to 2:1 ratio will output 1 dB for every 2 dB of input. If the ratio is set to 8:1, then the output will increase 1 dB for every 8 dB of input. Compression ratios of 100:1 or higher are considered limiters, in which case output does not increase when the signal exceeds the threshold setting. Attack is the amount of time it takes for attenuation to begin once the threshold has been crossed, typically measured in milliseconds. With this control, compression does not have to start right away, therefore preserving the initial part of the signal while compressing the rest. Release is the amount of time it takes for the attenuation to return to unity after the gain reduction, also measured in milliseconds. This will determine how long the signal remains in its compressed state. Makeup gain is the overall output level. Often after compressing the signal, we have decreased the overall output. This control will return it to its original level. As in all processing, we want to gain match as to change our timbre and not levels. Using the compressor in the channel strip plugin, we can demonstrate the effect of compression on the envelope of the signal. We want to gain match as to change our timbre and not levels. Release is the amount of time it takes for the attenuation to return to unity after the gain reduction, also measured in milliseconds. This will determine how long the signal.
Start thinking, I was doing right so hard. I thought back to when we was in London.
The top waveform illustrates the original signal, while the second waveform shows the result of the compression. In the second diagram, we can see that once the signal has crossed the threshold,
He said, you know, turn to Matthew 24. He said, no one knows the hour, nor do they know the day. But the kingdom is near. Don't let anything leave.
replaced 100% with the processed one.
As long as God
When using more than one dynamic processor on a track, it is most common to insert gates and expanders first in the signal flow. Also, be aware that the decay of the expander can make a track sound unnatural or draw attention to it. Some way, example, a compressor set to 2:1 ratio will output 1 dB for every 2 dB of input. If the ratio is set to 8:1, then the output will increase 1 dB for every 8 dB of input. Compression ratios of 100:1 or higher are considered limiters, in which case output does not increase when the signal exceeds the threshold setting. Attack is the amount of time it takes for attenuation to begin once the threshold has been crossed.
Maybe 10:1. 10:121, that's limiters. Pressure's like 9 below. 101. It's just everything cut off. Bruh. Like what? Obviously, all of them are important. Well, if you're leveling, then I want high attack and high ratios. No, but leveling, I'm thinking of, if you're thinking of vocals, and slow attack and high ratios.
Compression ratios of 100 to 1 or higher are considered limiters, in which case output does not increase when the signal exceeds the threshold setting. Attack is the amount of time it takes for attenuation to begin once the threshold has been crossed, typically measured in milliseconds.
I've seen this one used too.
With this control, compression does not have to start right away, therefore preserving the initial part of the signal while compressing the rest. Release is the amount of time it takes for the attenuation to return to unity after the gain reduction.
also measured in milliseconds. This will determine how long the signal remains in its compressed state. Makeup gain is the overall output level. Often after compressing the signal, we have decreased the overall output. This control will return it to its original level. As in all processing, we want to gain match as to change our timbre and not levels. Using the compressor in the channel strip plugin, we can demonstrate the effect of compression on the envelope of the signal. The top waveform illustrates the original signal, while the second waveform shows the result of the compression. In the second diagram, we can see that once the signal has crossed the threshold, there is a gradual attack that has been adjusted, and a gradual release time as the signal returns to the original levels. Using the different settings, we can see how much each parameter clearly alters the envelope. In a complex waveform, the result would be a change in timbre. There are several variations of compression that we will be covering in our discussion. First, let's talk about the two most used type of compression in mixing: leveling compression and envelope compression. Leveling compression is used quite often to control the varying levels on a vocal track, as well as removing unwanted transients. This increases our dynamic range, resulting in an increase in volume and overall fullness in the audio signal. As a general rule, leveling compression is useful for controlling the dynamic range of melodic instruments and vocals, where the notes are always changing. Optimal settings here include a very fast attack time and subtle changes or low ratios. The goal is maintaining transparency while controlling the dynamics. In this example, there are a variety of volume changes in the vocal track that could benefit from leveling compression. Some of the words being sung are lower in volumes than others. Also, as the track progresses, the singer's energy increases. Remember, we don't want to make unnatural changes to the vocal track to draw unwanted attention to it. Instead, we want to control the dynamic levels while maintaining the transparency of the performance. To do that, we want to grab the transients as quickly as possible using a very fast attack time. For this, we will be using a BF76 plugin modeled after the legendary 1176. In 1966, studio legend Bill Putman redesigned the highly successful 1175-1176 using FETs. The goal is maintaining transparency while controlling the dynamics.
Fast attack.
In this example, there are a variety of volume changes in the vocal track that could benefit from leveling compression. Some of the words being sung are lower in volumes than others. Also, as the track progresses, the singer's energy increases. Natural changes to the vocal track to draw unwanted attention to it. Instead, we want to control the dynamic levels while maintaining the transparency of the performance. To do that, we want to grab the transients as quickly as possible using a very fast attack time. For this, we will be using a BF76 plugin modeled after the legendary 1176. In 1966, studio legend Bill Putman redesigned the highly successful 1175-1176 using FETs, or field effects transistors, instead of tubes, resulting in an extremely fast attack time from 20 to 800 microseconds and a very pleasing sound. A 6 compressor is its fixed threshold point. By increasing the input gain, you push the signal over the threshold point. The amount of compression is determined by how much you push that input. They are all this day, and a great choice for enhancing vocals. We will begin by setting the ratio at 4:1 for subtleness and turn up the input of the compressor until we see the needles showing activity in the early part of the track where the levels are the lowest. Because we are changing the dynamic range, we are changing the level of the incoming signal. We will need to make adjustments on the output track to hit the threshold. We will need to decrease the output volume to match the gains. Unlike most plugins, there is no output meter to match.
They can
with
also
the
do this
input.
too.
So we will need to use the bypass button on the plugin to do an AP comparison on the compressed and uncompressed signals and listen for volume changes. We want to keep the level pretty close to the same so as not to change the original balance.
Two
of
sides
the
of the
mix.
same coin.
Similar techniques can be implemented on instrument tracks using this type of level compression using the 1176 style plugins. Snare drums can be tamed by controlling the dynamics and the ADSR, making the snare less annoying and more punchy. Reed and brass instruments, which also tend to vary in levels, can also be controlled using this process. Also, the timbre changes can make these instruments less harsh and more pleasing to the ear. These same leveling compression methods are useful tools for blending our tracks as well. If we place the same BF76 plugin on the drum subgroup, we're controlling dynamics and
I would
transient
sidechain
levels
that. That's
of
what I
all
would
the
do.
tracks at once. The result is a blending or gluing of the tracks, giving the entire drum set a more cohesive feeling. The same results are achieved when group compressing backing vocals and their mults, giving them a well-blended sound. Since we most likely have
And then-
compressors on each individual voice to control the dynamic range, we are now compressing it twice, or step compressing.
Step. Okay.
This technique is also commonly used in the broadcast industry to keep levels within a narrow dynamic range while keeping peak levels within legal limits. In the mixing process, a signal more than likely will be compressed
basically two
at the
tests.
master fader and once again in the mastering process.
But to
The result is a well-blended mix within a controlled dynamic range. The art of compression is one that requires a lot of practice to master. Even those who think they have mastered compression will stumble on a new idea or technique when working with a challenging mix. Level compression is crucial to all three of our mixing principles: balance, blend, and timbre, but is only the beginning of compressing techniques. Next, we will explore several important variations of compression to further enhance our mix.
feel like a compressor with a limiter. Or what's it called? The thing that bends and does that. All right, moving on before I get a headache.
So far, we have used compression and gating techniques on our audio tracks to dynamically level out our audio signal and remove unwanted transients. This helps create an even mix while holding the attention of the listener without being overpowering. This type of compression is best suited for melodic instruments or vocals that change pitch. For percussive type instruments that are not varying in pitch, we're going to use a more intricate technique that involves compressing various parts of the sound waves. There are not a lot of variety in the dynamic levels, which makes it actually sound over-processed and unnatural. We can also remove sustain from an instrument, which creates a space where we can put other instruments or vocals. For example, when some of the sustain of the kick drum is removed, we create space for the bass guitar. If we remove some of the sustain from the bass guitar, we make room for low-end samples or synthesizers. In this type of compression, we are manipulating the ADSR or envelope of the audio signal to open up windows in the time domain in similar frequency ranges. This allows other audio in that same frequency range to breathe, thus avoiding frequency masking. These compression techniques also bring into play the front-to-back dynamic of a mix that we discussed in the frequency domain using equalizers. Remember that if we want an instrument to sound punchy or closer, we want to make sure that it is brighter. This can be achieved with a slower compression attack. This tells the compressor to wait for the initial attack of the audio to pass before compressing the rest of the signal. If we want to make it sound further away, we make it sound darker with a faster attack time. This allows the compressor to grab the initial attack right away, compressing the higher frequencies, creating a darker timbre. By doing this with a compressor instead of an EQ, we're getting more of a natural sound, void of any phasing or coloring issues inherent in certain equalizers. Let's listen to the effects of this style of compression in a couple of scenarios. In this first demonstration, we're going to work with the kick drum track. If we look closely at the waveform, we can see that the signal is already quite compressed. We can tell because the shape has no random spikes or transients. The waveforms of the kick impulse are more in the shape of bricks. If we listen to the track, we can hear that indeed they are heavily compressed and seem a bit lifeless. We will now insert a compressor on the track. And this time, instead of using the Bomb Factory BF76,
It doesn't really change the waveform now.
we're
I
going
wish
to
it did.
use our standard channel
The way
strip
it looked,
plugin.
because then you could tell.
Although the BF76 is a great compressor for leveling,
Like an
its attack
analyzer.
is way too fast for any type of ADSR compression. The channel strip compressor gives us more control over the compression ratio and threshold, along with a longer attack time. This gives us the ability to really shape our ADSR envelope, resulting in more timbre control. In addition to listening to the effect of this type of compression, we're going to use the Schwab-Schoep Impulse Analyzer plugin to give us a view of how the compressor is shaping the envelope of the signal. To demonstrate the parameters of the compressor, we're going to over-exaggerate them just a bit to start, and then dial it in with a more practical setting. With the ratio set at 1:1 to start with, we want to set the threshold so that when the kick drum hits, it goes solidly into compression. Of course, with our ratio set to 1:1, we will hear very little attenuation. As we increase that ratio, you hear and see the compression attenuate the audio signal. Because our attack then go higher ones. We can demonstrate this by bypassing the channel strip compressor. Control range while avoiding an increase in the noise floor or reduction of headroom. Dynamic effects insert allowing redirection of the audio signal through plugins or external audio processors. The original signal is replaced 100% with a processed one. When using more than one dynamic processor on a track, it is most common to insert gates and expanders first in the signal flow. This allows us to compress only the audio that remains after gates and expanders have attenuated or removed parts of the audio signal. This, however, is not always the case. Occasionally, you will have a track with a lot of dynamic issues that need to be controlled before you can properly EQ it. As a rule of thumb, if the track has resonance or masking issues, then EQ first. If the issues are more dynamic in nature, then use compressors or gates first. Keep in mind that not all tracks need an expander gate. As a matter of fact, they should be used sparingly in the studio, only to remove excess noise or bleed through on a track. Too much gating can make a mix sound unnatural. Often in the studio, that bleed through is part of the ambience that gives some instruments their overall sound. There are some legendary sound engineers that will not use any gates in their mix. Gates are more often used in the live environment to control the high amount of bleed through in microphones in a loud stage environment. Because they typically come first in our signal flow, we shall begin our discussion on dynamics with expanders and gates. An expander gate attenuates signals below the set threshold. A detector circuit in the gate only allows the processor to let signals pass once a certain level set by the threshold has been exceeded. This detector circuit can be activated by either its own input signal or from an outside source known as a key input. Here are the common control parameters found on an expander gate and their functions. Threshold is the level at which the gain reduction begins, usually represented in level decibels. When any part of the audio signal exceeds that level, it triggers the detector circuit to allow the signal to pass while attenuating lower level signal.
There was something in there that actually made sense. Hold on.
Typically patched in the signal path either in an analog or digital realm by using inserts. The patch points in analog consoles or in a patch bay allow the signal processors to become part of the signal chain by interrupting the audio in the signal path and returning it to the same point. Pro Tools has 10 inserts per channel, allowing redirection of the audio signal through plugins or external audio processors. The original signal is replaced 100% with a processed one. When using more than one dynamic processor on a track, it is most common to insert gates and expanders first in the signal flow. This allows us to compress only the audio that remains after gates and expanders have attenuated or removed parts of the audio signal. This, however, is not always the case. Occasionally, you will have a track with a lot of dynamic issues that need to be controlled before you can properly EQ it. If the track has resonance or masking issues, then EQ first. If the issues are more dynamic in nature, then use compressors or gates first.
These are you get it. Let's say, yeah, saxophone. Same as not compression, percussion, compression. More quickly. That's what I would pick. Which type of filter do we use to isolate the S frequency in a set chain? isolating it. Oh, you want the what's it called? High pass, right? Get rid of the lows. Yeah, high pass. You often hear the music drop in volume, almost automatically when DJ's talking. Oh yeah, that's definitely ducking. Or side chain. I would have said side chain. So yeah.